people that are registered for the session, and I will also share the slides with you. Dependent on the number of feedbacks we get, there are nearly 400 people registered for today's event. If I get 4 pieces of feedback, it's going to be a while before you get your content. So let me know how you find it. Let us know what we are doing really well. Let us know what you want more of in the future. The HPMA programme is very much shaped around what you, the members, need and want. So your feedback is super valuable, especially as we've just started commissioning for next year. So without further ado, I'll be in the chat to help you if you've got any tech problems throughout the session. But for now, I shall hand over to Liz to kick us off.
Thanks, Lorna. Hi, everybody. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Liz Perry. My substantive job is as Chief People Officer for Devon Partnership NHS Trust, and I'm the branch lead for the Southwest for HPMA. I'm really delighted to see so many of you today. This is our third in a series of sessions on change that we've run through the Southwest, and today we're focusing on the culture of change. So I'd just like to say a really huge thank you to both Richard Bates and Rona Galt. Richard, as you can see from the screen, is Strategic Director of Finance and Resources at Guildford and Waverley Councils. Rona is Director of HR and OD for Avon and Somerset Police, but has a long history in the NHS family. So it's lovely to see both of them today, and we really appreciate them giving up their time and their huge expertise on change and the impact of change on culture, etc. So thank you very much. I'd also like to say a big thank you to committee members for the Southwest, and particularly Joel for this session, who have enabled us to be here today. And thanks to Lorna and team for all the practicalities. That's enough from me. I unfortunately can't stay for the whole of the event, but I look forward to the recording. I'm going to leave you in Joel and Lorna's capable hands. And for now, I'm going to hand over to Richard. Nice to see you all.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. So as you've already been told, so I'm Richard Bates. I'm Strategic Director of Finance at Guildford and Waverley Councils. And as of about 3 days ago, I've just started my 37th year in local government finance. I'm sure you'd be very pleased to hear that I'm not going to be talking to you about local government finance much this afternoon, but more about what's happening in terms of change in local government at the moment. So hopefully that'll be something that will be useful to understand, but also reflecting on some of the changes I've seen over the last 36 years and some of the learning I've actually sort of taken from that. So as I say, hopefully you'll find it an interesting session. So just to fill in a few of the gaps at the moment in terms of what's happening at this current moment in time. So you're probably aware from various places around the country, and certainly in the Southwest, you've got a mixed picture already. So very much fragmented arrangements for local government across the country. So a lot of it was formed back in 1974, when you saw a 2-tier system implemented, so county councils and district and borough councils below them. So the county councils doing the bigger stuff, so social care, so adults and children's social care, highways, waste disposal, education, so all the school side of things. And then below that, you had the second tier of district and borough councils doing more local stuff on housing, homelessness, the waste collection, local planning, environmental health, leisure centres, those sorts of things. There is, of course, a third tier below that as well, which gets less of a mention, of town and parish councils. They basically have remained the same for many, many years and are not looking to be changed in this current process either. What we saw under, so from about 1996, under the last few governments, is that some areas have started to be reorganised, and you've started to see effectively mergers between some of the districts and borough councils and the county councils, forming what is called unitary councils. So it happened in Cornwall some while back, it happened in Dorset in 2019, Somerset in 2021, and Cumbria a couple of years ago. Other places around the country, however, still remain 2-tier. So you're dealing with a system at the moment where actually you don't have any consistency between one area and the next, which obviously makes life very difficult for everybody concerned to understand who does what and to actually sort of think about where your services are coming from. On top of that, what's happened during the last Labour government, so 2008, that's that sort of time, we also had the introduction of what we called strategic authorities. And normally these came with a mayor, sometimes an elected mayor. So places like obviously the City of London, or London basically, with the London mayor, but also Greater Manchester and other places like that, basically, that have mayors. You'll see from the picture of England that the grey bits are areas that have strategic authorities at the moment, but actually the purple bits are areas that don't. So you have quite a large amount of the country at the moment that doesn't actually have a strategic authority at all. Now that is all going to change. So these strategic authorities effectively sit above either the county councils or above your unitary councils, and they've been given powers from the government basically to deal with things like transportation, so much more strategic things, thinking about economic development, thinking about skills development. And in one or two places, so Greater Manchester being the first, tying back up with the health sector. So Greater Manchester have been given the budgets for health as well as social care. So they can start making some of those tie-ups basically, which obviously make a lot of sense between some of the early work that councils do through to adult social care and tying those things up with the health service. So I'm hoping that down the line that may well be a way of actually moving forward between the two sectors. But at the moment, as I say, it's very much a mixed picture across the whole of the country. So back in December, so I think it was the same week we got the local government finance settlement. So it was rather an interesting week for the local authorities. So the government issued something called the English Devolution White Paper. And basically what it said was that all areas in the country will now become unitary councils by April 2028, and some of those will happen in April 2027. So all of your county councils that exist at the moment and your district and borough councils will disappear. On top of that, all areas, so all those bits that are purple on that chart a minute ago, will also have strategic authorities and elected mayors. If this all happens in that timescale, I will be severely surprised, especially as on Saturday, the local government minister was one of the casualties of the cabinet reshuffle. But at the moment, the government seems to be holding the line that in the next 2 and a bit years, the whole local government setup is going to change and be standardised across the country. So in terms of the devolution bit, it's very much about, the theory is that powers will be devolved from central government so that decisions can be made much more closely to the communities and business they affect. The theory originally was that that came with money. So of course, areas were very keen to have devolution deals. The reality is that a lot of this has come without funding, but with extra responsibilities. And I'm sure in your sector, you probably heard that elsewhere as well before. So implications of what's going to change. So we're going to have many fewer councils in the future, but they will be bigger. So we'll still have 2 tiers, but rather than having county councils and district councils below them, you'll now have strategic authorities and unitary councils below them. So all of them will be unitaries. As I say, there won't be any districts and boroughs or counties left at all. What it should mean is it should be much, much easier for the public to understand where their services are coming from. I think if you ask most people at the moment, who provides me with social care or who looks after the roads or whatever, most people wouldn't really know whether that was their parish council or their town council or their county council or district council. This, in theory, should make things much more joined up. And obviously, it should be helping to save money as well. It should also make it easier for other bodies. So people like the health service, but the police and other public sector bodies to understand who it is they need to speak to get things done in a coordinated way. Strategic authorities, certainly, as I say, from looking at the Greater Manchester example, it's been a great opportunity for joint working. You've seen really good sort of join up with things like the fire service, police service, health service, and other bodies as well. So hopefully, again, when this all settles down in about goodness knows how many years' time, hopefully it'll be something better basically that comes out of this massive change. What we do know, and I certainly know from past experience, this is going to be a massive workforce change basically. So both in terms of obviously transitioning from where we are now to the new authorities, but also for your future workforce. So big changes in local government workforce coming over the next few years. So why am I talking to you today, basically? So this is now my 4th time going through local government reorganisation. So I think I'm probably unique in the country in terms of actually having had that experience. It seems to have followed me around somewhat. So back in 1997, I was at Dorset County Council when Bournemouth and Poole were taken out of the old Dorset County Council and were set up as unitary councils for each of those 2 towns. In 2019, I was the Chief Financial Officer at Dorset County Council when Dorset County Council became the new Dorset Council, a new unitary council. So in that case, we had 1 county, we had 2 districts, 2 unitaries, so Bournemouth and Poole, and 6 districts, so small districts underneath the county council. So those elements were merged into 2 new unitaries. So that was my first experience of a large-scale LGR rationalisation. I then went to Mendip District Council and thought that would be a very nice place to work part-time and do a short-term contract and do something a bit different for the rest of my sort of time in local government before retirement. 6 months into that, they announced that Somerset was going to become unitary. So, of course, with the experience I'd already got, they asked me to stay on. And 3 years down the line, I basically saw the new Somerset unitary being formed. In this case, it was 1 county council and 4 districts merged together into 1 new unitary, so the new Somerset Council. So I'm now the CFO at Guildford and Waverley councils. I went there when Guildford had their financial crisis about 2.5 years ago, again on a 6-month contract just to go and sort them out. What happened was 6 months into that, we had a new chief executive came in, persuaded me to stay for another year. That was up some while ago. Of course, we then had the December announcement about Surrey being one of the first new councils basically to go through the LGR process. So I'm now obviously leading the process for the Surrey reorganisation from the district council's point of view. Now, in this case, we've got 1 county, so the county of Surrey, plus 11 districts, and that they will be basically reformed into either 2 or 3 new unitary councils on the 1st of April 2027. So I've seen a lot of change in that respect. I've also been part in the past of police authority mergers. So when Dorset did the alliance basically with Devon and Cornwall Police, I've seen the merger of Dorset Fire Authority with Wiltshire Fire Authority, and lots of partnership and collaborative working between various county councils and other councils along the way. So I've seen quite a lot of stuff over my time. So what's happening now in terms of LGR? So the government have basically said that they want to set up councils that are going to have a population of about 500,000. That seems to be their magic figure. There's some PwC report written about 10 years ago, I think, that came up with that notion. I don't think there's any particular empirical evidence to say that's the right size, but that's what they're aiming for. So we're not allowed to go outside the existing county boundaries. So you've got to stick to Surrey, in my case, basically. So that can be divided into pieces, but it can't be including parts of Hampshire or bits of Sussex or whatever else. So again, similarly, when Devon will be going through this, they won't be able to nick parts of any of the adjoining counties, I'm afraid. So. An interesting one is that one of the criteria is they have to be financially viable. Now, if you look at Surrey, they have probably the council in the country, which is probably the highest profile in terms of its debt. So Woking, which is only a small district council, has managed to amass over £3 billion worth of debt. And I did say billion. The total across the whole of Surrey is over £7 billion worth of debt. So we have Spelthorne in special measures. We have Woking in special measures with commissioners appointed. We have Guildford, who were on the brink, but fortunately, I think I've done my job and helped to turn them round. And the county council themselves have over £1 billion worth of debt. So how these councils are going to be financially viable when money is being cut, and obviously money is very tight, will be very interesting to watch down the line. So the councils in December were asked basically to submit proposals. So Surrey, so you see on the bottom line there, so Surrey, Sussex, Essex, Hampshire, Norfolk and Suffolk have been put in the priority programme. They are the ones that they are hoping to get through for the 1st of April 2027. The others you'll see above basically are the areas which will still go through, but they will go through for April 2028. So a massive amount of stuff that's going to be going on. And what you tend to find is that in each area, you won't have one bid, you will have a number of bids. So the county council will have its ideas about what it thinks is the answer for the future. But then the districts and borough councils will have their thoughts as well. So there'll be more than one submission probably in most areas, which obviously the Secretary of State will then have to consider. So you come back to their criteria then, so 500,000, that doesn't really sort of work when Surrey's 1.2 million population. So clearly Surrey has to be split into more than one authority. The question is whether it's going to be 2 or 3. That basically means that your big services, so like adult social care, children's social care, your highways department, such things, they will have to be split between the new councils. So we've had to do business cases to actually support the proposals and then explain them to government officials as to how these things are going to work in the future, how the savings are going to come through, obviously from things like less staffing, less councillors, less bureaucracy effectively, to make those things stack up for the future. As I've already said, Secretary of State then will decide on which of those options it's going to be. There has been hardly any consultation with the public. We've had, I think, a 10-week consultation just done online, more aimed at things like universities and the police and people to be consulted with. The public really, for what is really obviously a key public service, have had almost no say whatsoever. So interesting way of going about things, but there we go. So we will set up what's called a shadow council. So we've got till May 2026, so next May, we'll be having elections for a shadow council. So that basically will run, setting up effectively ready for the new council to start in April 2027, alongside the existing councils. So you'll have that to run as well, on top of the other 12 councils will still be running for the 11 months, basically from May 2026 through to vesting day. So in Surrey then, so we basically are the guinea pig. So say there's a few others in the priority programme, but they're not submitting their business cases until this November. 2 business cases got submitted, one from the county council supported by 2 of the other unitaries, and the other one by the other 9 districts. So we're expecting to have a decision in October. I talk about October, that's now next month, of course. That'll be come along with legislation in February. Basically, they'll set up the new councils and set out the process by which we get from where we are now through to the new councils. As I say, elections to plan for in May 2026. Difficult at the moment because those councillors who may want to stand for those elections do not even know what the council makeup is going to be. They're going to be standing for at this moment in time. So big amount, so huge amounts of work, of course, to be done. So we're going to need a transition team to get us from A to B. And effectively then, as I say, the new councils start April 2027, and the existing 12 councils then would simply disappear and they will cease to exist. Just very quickly in terms of the 2 proposals. So the county council's proposal is on the left, going for a West Surrey and an East Surrey. I think it's probably the simplest way of doing things, but the district's proposal has gone up for 3 unitary councils, and we've very much tried to do something whereby it makes a lot more sense to group some of these councils together. So if you look at them, the blue ones at the top, they are all basically the councils within the M25. So very much about dense populations, that commuting into central London and such things. So those things have a lot in common. West Surrey, the 4 councils there have a lot more in common in terms of being much more rural. And then the purple ones are the ones that tend to look towards things like Gatwick Airport area in terms of their travel to work and their sort of travel, their employment as well. So as I say, that's proposals that's gone in, backed by big business cases. But we will now wait and see, basically, as I say, what the government decides. So what I've tried to do now in the next few slides is just sort of capture some of the things that have come out of my previous processes. And I think one of the things that has struck me is that where the existing county council has been split into bits, so effectively that original organisation disappears, the results seem to have been better. And that's not because a county council cannot work and it is a poor organisation. I worked in one for 30 years. But I think that by forming something completely new, I think you are basically getting away from probably a whole load of history, basically about how things worked in the past, and moving to something whereby you can start with a new organisation from scratch. So my example there, so Somerset, so they basically, the county council there absorbed the 4 districts. And I think people at the time basically reflected that all they really did was change the badge on County Hall. From Somerset County Council, it became Somerset Council. The 4 district functions basically sort of merged into that bigger organisation. And within 2 years, they were basically in a financial crisis. So they've been given exceptional financial support by the government, basically to prop up their day-to-day running expenses, and basically are in a real pickle in terms of their finances going forwards. Very little's really changed. I think the culture has been very much stayed as it was within the county council, which is obviously the way things have been done for donkey's years. And I'm sure you have interactions with county councils and probably know how bureaucratic they can be. And very little change has really happened up until this point, since the council went live 2.5 years ago. It's now being forced to happen because actually, to solve their financial problems, they're going to have to do things very differently and think again. I think on the counter to that, where you see that the councils have been split, so Cumbria, Cheshire, Dorset, Northamptonshire, I think it has produced much better results. So the new organisations have been required, to set up whole new systems, structures and processes. They take the best bits, in terms of the way things have worked best from the existing councils into the new organisations. And I think that opportunity really to set the culture of the new organisation from the start, with a new set of councillors, with a new council and a whole new set of senior officers and staffing, that seems to have produced a real change and a real catalyst basically for the future, rather than simply joining 5 things into one and say it all sort of staying the same. So we know in Surrey, basically, that Surrey County Council will not exist. It will be split into bits. So hopefully, my fingers are crossed that will be a positive thing for the future. So in terms of staffing side of things, so obviously a massive impact for the staff within the 12 councils. We will need to be setting up these transition teams. But we've got to remember that as well as setting up the new councils, we also need to be continuing with business as usual as well. So obviously, quite clearly, extra support is needed to actually get us through this process now, between now and April 27, when everything goes live. On the counter to that, we also know that the staffing in the new councils is going to reduce at some point. So obviously, to make the savings coming out of the process, the actual number of people we get will reduce, particularly around things like our back office functions, which obviously will merge, and our senior management. So at some point, we need to start planning for that reduction in our actual staffing requirements at the same time as we're trying to deal with the extra business, so the extra sort of load on our business for the short term. So I'm sure that at some stage in the next couple of months, we'll be talking about how we get to that. So we'll probably stop permanent recruitment, particularly in things like the back office and senior management, and be moving much more sort of short-term, sort of fixed-term appointments, agency contracts and interims in the lead up basically to the new councils, just to make sure basically that we can actually get ourselves over the line, but are not then carrying a massive staffing establishment into the new councils, which obviously would be expensive to get rid of. So lots of extra staff requirements, as I've said then, so for transition, for backfill, for the shadow council work, for business as usual, and to cover basically your turnover as well. So huge amount of stuff that's going to be going on over the next 18 months, or in the case of some of the other authorities, the next 2.5 years. Okay, so the sort of things that we're going to be expecting people to be doing. So these really early stages, it's about developing things like business cases. So obviously requiring particular skills from people to do that sort of thing. For the process from when we get the answer from the government through to going live. So lots of program management to bring people together basically. So a transition team, which obviously will require lots of professional staff, people like finance, people like legal and HR. ICT, so if you bring together 7 organisations, obviously lots of things will probably have to change. It probably won't be the case of simply using whatever system one of the councils has. It probably won't be fit for purpose. So lots of new systems and trying to bring together things like, 7 payrolls into one, 7 payment systems into one. So a whole load of stuff that needs to be integrated. Some of that stuff won't happen day one. Some of those things are patched over for day one to make sure they still work, and then dealt with over the next 12 months or so. But massive, again, input basically required. Because we'll be splitting up the counties into bits, so what's called disaggregation of the upper tier services. So we basically need to split up, for example, adult social care into either 2 new adult social care functions or to 3 for Surrey. So that obviously requires new senior managers for those services, but also the thought then about where they're going to operate from, and obviously the whole thought then about how we continue to actually sort of support our clients and residents basically and provide their services, which obviously will be now from 3 services rather than just 1. We also have the exciting bits from the accountancy point of view, having to split your balance sheets up and the funding, and of course the debt, because hopefully it won't simply be a case of Woking's part of West Surrey, therefore it all goes to West Surrey. There needs to be some way of actually dividing that money out between all the councils so that the burden is shared, and hopefully then those councils can actually survive into the future. So the counter to disaggregation is then aggregation, so bringing together so 1 or more districts together. So in the case of Surrey, then it'll either be 4 districts or 5 or 6 districts coming together with part of the county council. They will all have their own systems, processes, terms and conditions, contracts, all those sort of things you run in one organisation will have to be obviously brought back together and transferred into one way of working for the new organisation. And having been through this several times before, it is an enormous amount of work to get to that position where you even understand what you've got in terms of things like contracts and assets, let alone bring them together and use those sensibly in the future going forwards. The other joy basically for some of the finance people would be to how to harmonise council tax. Because what you can't have it, so at the moment you'll have six different district councils all with different council tax levels, but the new council will have to charge everybody the same. So those sort of things have to be worked through. Transition costs, just in Surrey alone, we estimate it's going to cost £60 million to get from where we are now through to the new councils. We get government grant of £380,000. That is it. The rest of it is paid for by the existing councils. And as I've already said, a lot of those councils already have their own financial woes. So there is no massive support coming basically from the government for this process. The expectation is that you will make savings by having less staff and costs going forward. And within 2 years, you'll have paid back that initial investment through the efficiencies you're going to make. And then, of course, you've got things like setting up the new council. So lots of things that need to be done in terms of actually making sure that the assets are transferred, all your legal contracts and things are sorted, your branding, your communications, those sort of elements basically all have to be thought about for your new organisation. So some of the things that have emerged, as I say, in the process that I've been through. So obviously at this stage of the process, so let's just take Surrey as an example. Obviously, we've got a bid in from the county council and 2 districts, and a bid in from the 9 districts. We are still trying to talk to each other at the moment, but in a political world, some of our council leaders like to take the opportunity to fall out. What we know is, of course, though, in the middle of October, the Secretary of State will say the answer is either 2 unitaries or 3 unitaries for Surrey. And at that point, whatever our differences have been, and whatever the arguments have been in the press and on social media for the last 6 months, well, probably now more like 9 months since the announcements, that needs to be put to one side, and we need to start thinking about actually how we get basically those councils working as well as they possibly can, whatever the answer may well be, because ultimately we're here basically to provide those services for our residents. So all the politics, all of the silliness that's gone on over the last 9 months needs to be put to one side, and actually everybody work together instead. Obviously, in terms of the staff, so lots of the staff, particularly in the back office functions and some of the senior management, are obviously very uncertain at the moment what's going to happen to them. So communicating with them, really, really essential. Keeping them up to speed as to what's happening, what the timescales are, when they're likely to hear things. Make sure they don't hear stuff basically or read stuff in the press rather than actually being told things themselves. So that comms plan, really, really important to make sure that they're brought along with us. One really good thing that, as I say, we tried to do both in Dorset and Somerset was to get as many staff as we could involved in the process. So lots of the work streams going on for transition. If we can get people actually involved in that and actually working as part of some of those transition teams and backfill their day-to-day job, it gave them great experience for them to learn and develop along the way and be part of the process. And I think they felt much better going forwards and in a much better place to apply for jobs in the new councils because they knew what was going on. Quite obviously, the senior management side of things, there's going to be a lot less in the future. You're only going to have 3 councils or 2 councils, not 12. Therefore, you don't need 12 CFOs. You don't need 12 chief executives. You don't need 12 heads of HR either. So there'll be quite a lot of those people quite happy to say, thank you very much. I'm over 55, I take my pension and disappear. That's fine. What comes with that, though, of course, is that loss of knowledge. So you lose basically a whole load of people who have all that corporate history, which obviously can be a real problem. What we also need to remember is that the councils may well close and disappear, the existing ones, on the 31st of March 2027, sorry. But actually, you still need to close them down. So all of their accounts still need to be closed, all of their assets need to be transferred, their contracts need to be transferred, all the HR documentation needs to be sorted, all your payroll stuff needs to be sorted, tax things, all that sort of thing. So you actually need to keep some staff on beyond vesting day, dealing with closing down the old councils, as well as starting up your new councils. What we found both in Dorset and Somerset was that actually some of those senior managers were quite happy to take on roles for 3 or 4 months, leading some of that process basically being done. So actually, you didn't have to lose everybody and lose all that knowledge and experience straight away. It was useful to keep people on and get them to look after some of those work streams and actually keep that knowledge in the building at the same time. So just one more thing to consider. So because this is being done in quite a rush, now I'll give you an example. So in Dorset, we had almost 4 years to do the whole process. This time round in Surrey, say the announcement was in December and the council goes live in April 2027. So we basically have about 2 years less to do this whole process. So a lot of the focus at the moment is going to be on making sure that the council is safe and legal on day one. So can we provide our services? Can we pay people? Can we pay our contractors? A lot of the other positive changes and transformation and stuff will have to come later. So not an ideal place to be. Much better if you'd actually got all your structures in place, all your personnel in place, all those bits and pieces on day one. But it just simply will not be possible to do that. So longer term, okay, so obviously the numbers of councils we've got will significantly reduce. So there can be far fewer staff required in back office functions in the future. So that may well be an opportunity for other bodies, such as the health service and people, to pick up some of those people down the line. Of course, in the shorter term, there'll be that bigger requirement. In the longer term, there'll be a lesser requirement. Senior management posts will obviously reduce, as I've said. That has a knock-on effect. So your pool of future leaders at the moment is being developed, particularly in things like smaller authorities or districts and boroughs. And those people then can tend to move up into county councils or unitaries. But that pool of future leaders basically will not exist. You're only going to now have sort of 50 authorities across the country rather than 400 and something. So it's going to be much more difficult, and a problem that I can see happening down the line. I think in terms of frontline staff, I think much more limited impact. Their services basically just will transfer across to the new council. So if you're a social worker providing services in, let's say, I don't know, Tavistock, then at the moment you probably work for Devon, but obviously in the future you might work for West Devon or East Devon. I'm trying to work out where Tavistock is now, but whatever the new council is going to be called. So sorry, I was trying to be clever, but I failed miserably. And then in terms of transformation, so massive opportunity. I think the councils that have got this right in terms of the process, seen it a big opportunity to improve their services and transform them. Probably a once in a lifetime opportunity, basically, to really shake things up and do things differently. And I think this is where technology and probably some of the things like AI will come in, no doubt, whereby at the moment we sort of look at it and think, well, do we want to tinker with AI around our payment system, for example? Whereas actually this may well be the time to say, we're going to have a brand new finance system. Let's embrace this and have a go. I think from that, basically, we think probably about at least a third of the savings will come by introducing technology and better ways of working in the future. So the services will still be provided, but hopefully done in a much more efficient and transformative way. That's it.
And so many questions for you, Richard. If I might jump right in. I am just going to stop your sharing so you're nice and big on people's screens. Okay, some really good questions actually, which might slightly overlap, but I'll try and group them together. Thinking about the changes in large organisations, what one task would you advise employers must do to ensure the success of changes involved for the people?
Yeah, I mean, I think that to me, again, comes back to communication, explaining to people what it is basically we're trying to actually do, what it is we're trying to achieve, and then basically making sure that people understand, what those goals and things are. I think that way people actually come along with you. I think if you don't do that, then I think you're basically setting yourself up to fail.
Good point, well made. How much of the existing culture of an organisation influences the success of change?
Yeah, really interesting. And as I say, I think from my personal experience, I think you've got to really sort of set that culture from the outset. So when the new shadow councils will be set up next April, their first job will be just to actually appoint the senior officers. So they'll be appointing their chief executive, their CFO, and their legal monitoring officer. And the new councillors will be being elected next May. That is the opportunity, I think, whereby they then got to really think about what it is they want to look like in the future. So I think it's really from those very early days whereby the sort of people they're going to go out and recruit and the sort of ethos and things they got with them, that will put the stamp on what that new council looks like going forwards. And I say, I think where people like Somerset probably didn't work so well was because you tended to stick with a lot of people who were already there and actually just incorporate basically more things into it. So really the culture didn't change and nothing really has actually moved on that in 2.5 years. So I think basically because you're going to be in most of these cases now setting up things from scratch, implementing that basically change from your senior management and new councillors from the outset. I think that's probably absolutely key.
Nice, very nice. So these changes can be overlaid with the merger of Surrey Sussex NHS ICB by early 2026. With both NHS LAS going through such major changes in the similar timescales, what do you see as being the main challenges for delivering services locally?
Yeah, I think it is a massive change, isn't it? I think the whole of the public sector again is going through a massive change at the moment. So, the ability of I'm certainly finding from a local government point of view, our ability to get hold of decent people, in terms of actually leading some of this program management side of things, and actually trying to get the right skills and people in is really difficult. And I think because we're going to have the situation whereby our transition and the changes with the NHS are happening at the same time, trying to get that support basically for the transition process, both in terms of those professional skills, but also that program management skills and things, it's going to be really hard. So I think we're going to have a period of 2 or 3 years where our councillors are already saying, "Oh, we don't want to pay that amount of money." The quote last week was that's the equivalent to paying a brain surgeon, just to get an interim head of environment in for 12 months. Well, unfortunately, at the moment, that's just simply the case. So if you want people to run your services, you're having to pay that. So I think you're going to be competing against each other, in that demand basically for those good people with good change skills, but also that good sort of program management skills, which is going to be really difficult. So hopefully we'll be first in the queue and get all the good people first.
Well, in that similar vein, two questions that are kind of tied together. Will you be signposting people across organisations and vacancies as part of the redundancy and restructure? And coupled with that, how close do you think the NHS or public sector is at something like a redeployment pool?
Yeah, so certainly within the councils, they will be. I mean, we tend to do in the past is work from the top down. So to make sure basically that as many of those people who wanted to have jobs were protected, and then things only went outside once that those have been offered to obviously all the existing employees. So opportunities for redeployment and things along the way, which work really well. I don't think we've done very well over the years in terms of actually having anything in terms of redeployment between the NHS and local government. And maybe this is an opportunity to start thinking about that, because actually there may well be some of the skills that we require or you require going spare probably in 3 years' time, which actually may be helping each other in terms of actually how this goes forwards.
100%. And keeping talented people in the public sector is always the challenge, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Really nice question from Paul, actually. In your experience, how much time do leadership teams spend actively on managing culture of newly formed organisations? How much time should they spend on doing it? And have you seen any examples where this has been done well?
I've not been involved probably in any of the examples that have been done particularly well, but I have seen some that have been remarkably successful. I mean, I think Dorset being one of the early ones, I think we probably didn't pay enough attention to thinking about what that culture was going to be like for the two councils in the future. And I think perhaps we missed an opportunity there. I think Somerset, I've already said, I think because we basically kept far too many of the people who were already at Somerset County Council. I don't think we really managed to actually impose a new culture on that organisation at all. I think if you look further around the country, some of the more recent examples, I think particularly things like Cumbria, where actually they took a different approach and have basically started almost with a clean slate. They basically didn't keep many of the senior managers from the old county. They went out basically and pick and chose people who I think they actually thought would actually bring those right skills and the right ability to actually impose that new culture from the outset. That's difficult because it comes then with a higher price tag, because you end up having to make more of your senior managers redundant. But I think basically in the long term, that may well be something that proves to be worthwhile. I was at a recent conference in Birmingham and talking to one of the ladies from Cumbria. They thought that their process had gone really well. and have basically put them 10 steps ahead, you know, in terms of actually embracing the new councillors and getting them on board by having people with new ideas and things that have been bought from elsewhere around the country. So.
Nice, very nice. Joel, do you have anything to add, ask, or otherwise?
No, also conscious of time, and very keen to hear what Rona's got to say about cultural impact as well in her sector. So we might come back to one of my questions at the end if there's time. Thank you, Richard.
No problem.
In which case, let's add Rona to the stage.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear. Let me know when you're ready for your slides.
Gosh.
Loving those questions, everybody. They were really rich. Do keep them coming for Rona. We will jump into Q&A again at the end of Rona's presentation. Looking good. And you've just flicked onto mute, but you're looking good. You're still on mute. Where is your button gone? There you are.
I'm back. It's because I'm trying to share my audio later on, so it's all very complicated, isn't it, Lorna? But I'm screen sharing, so I'll get onto my presenter mode. Can you see hopefully you can see my slides now and you can still hear me.
Yep, you're good to go. Thank you.
Great. Phew. Hello, I'm Rona Galt. I'm the Director of HR and OD at Avon and Somerset Police. And I want to talk about when HR leads culture change, because I believe that's when magic truly happens. And I will explain, I promise, and I'll back it up with lots of evidence. So probably good to start with a bit about me. So I know quite a lot of people on the call, so hello and say hi if you know me. I started my career in the NHS. So after university, I joined the NHS on the Graduate Management Training Scheme, GMTS. And you can see a little cheesy graduation photo in the bottom left. And in amongst that group of graduates was my boyfriend, but now my husband, Simon. And so when I finished the scheme in Scotland, I relocated to Bristol and I started at University Hospitals Bristol. My first job was as a commissioning manager. You don't have commissioning or PBR in Scotland, so I didn't really know what that was, but, you know, figure it out and got on with it. And then I spent 10 years at University Hospitals Bristol, or the BRI as is kind of more commonly known. And did a lot of general management roles, waiting list management, really learned my craft as an operational manager, and finished off, I think I was a deputy divisional manager at the end of my time there. And then when my next job came up, it was advertised in the neighbouring or rival trust at the time, North Bristol NHS Trust, or NBT. And obviously, University Hospitals Bristol and North Bristol Trust are now going through a group amalgamation, but at the time we were deep rivals, despite being only a couple of miles up the road from each other. And so when I announced my resignation and that I was leaving for this really exciting job as a directorate manager at NBT, my exec director at the time, who shall remain nameless because you probably still know her, some of you on the call, she said to me, Rona, do you know that North Bristol is a failing trust? What on earth are you doing taking your career to a failing trust? Are you going to be an island of perfection in a sea of despair? And I just thought, oh my goodness, what on earth is she talking about? What have I got myself into? Well, all will be revealed as my talk goes on. But I had a great time at NBT, and I worked at NBT for another 10 years. And I started off as a directorate manager for a clinical directorate called Neurosciences. It was a regional service across most of the Southwest. And then moved into a divisional director role for neurosciences and musculoskeletal services after we had a restructure, and more on that in a minute. And then during my time there, I had the opportunity to leave the NHS. So the trust and supported me, and NHS Improvement sponsored me to work in industry. So I worked for HSBC UK. There I am, sitting outside a bank branch in Bath somewhere, looking very proud. And as part of this, the Ed Smith Fellowship, I spent some time in the private sector, working on HSBC's Shared Ambition programme, which was basically their cultural change programme. And about this point, I think I started to see the light about HR, and that being probably the future for me personally and professionally, but also just the answer to everything. And wouldn't it be easier if everyone just understood that HR is really where it's at when it comes to culture change and organisational change? So I worked for HSBC for 6 months, and then noticed, like strategized, shall we say, a way to get into the world of HR. So I started a master's in my spare time at University of West of England in HR, and then I also found a job back at NBT as the Director of Transformation, and that reported into the Chief People Officer. And at the time, this Chief People Officer, well, she was a ferocious but also massively impressive exec. She's called Jacqueline Ferguson. She's unfortunately no longer with us, but she really probably was had the most impact on my career and the direction it's taken. So I came back to NBT, worked as Director of Transformation, and then finally, eventually tried to negotiate my way into an HR role. So became Associate Director of Culture, Leadership and Development, and then finally did a little stint before going on maternity leave as Acting Deputy Chief People Officer. And then during maternity leave, as I think probably you can see from my photos, I've got 2 kids, but I think both times I was on maternity leave was probably when I made big decisions about my career. So the first time was after HSBC, I was on maternity leave and I made a decision that I wanted to make the move, and that looked like going into the transformation role. Seemed like the right way to do it. And then my next maternity leave, I decided to take the leap and leave the NHS and try and like really earn my stripes in HR, free from the kind of history of operational management, which I was always kind of able to fall back on, I think, in my role in the NHS. So that's my story. And I hopefully the relevance of this will become clearer as my story goes on. So the brief was, Joel, as far as I remember, was to talk about change. And so, as with all good stories, it starts with challenge, a bit peril, it starts with problems with money, as I think is a familiar storyline to everyone in the NHS and public sector, but also combined with low staff morale, average to below average staff survey results at North Bristol Trust, poor public reputation, backed by a really poor CQC inspection and rating. But don't worry, the story gets good. We went on a journey of cultural redesign, and it had a hero, this story, so led by the Chief People Officer, Jacqueline, as I've mentioned. So what I'm going to talk you through is a period of my life from about 2016 to 2019. Now, we all know what happens after 2019, but 2016 to 2019, I was party to a massive organisational culture change. And I think it shaped me as an HR practitioner, but I also think it's got loads of lessons for all of us as we continue to meet and face change head on in our careers. So where to begin? So 2014, this before my story begins really, but Southmead Hospital, there were 2 trusts, Southmead, Frenchy, 2 hospitals. A new PFI was built on the Southmead site. It's called the Brunel Building. I'm sure you've seen it. And the hospital, so all relocated onto one site, the Southmead site, in April of 2014. And later that financial year, reported its first financial deficit. We then move into 2015. The CQC has an unannounced inspection, which finds that the trust requires improvement. And whilst it was good for caring across the board, the urgent and emergency care services were considered to be inadequate. Probably you're sensing a theme here, but staff morale was low. And in our staff survey, for example, 59% of respondents said that they would recommend North Bristol as a place to work, which was below average across the country. And something that later we see great improvement on. So in 2016, NHS Improvement gets involved and says enough is enough, North Bristol, you're into financial special measures. And we were given a financial control target, which at the time was to finish the financial year £44 million in deficit, which was an £8 million stretch on North Bristol's original financial plan for the year. And so what happens from 2016 to 2019 is where that HR magic happens, and all of the bad things go away, shall we say. So what is this HR magic that I'm going to tell you about? Well, to be honest, it's not rocket science. And I think that's my main point. It's really back to basics. So what did this Chief People Officer do? She fixed the money, she invested in leadership, and she improved patient care. That's it, basically, as simple as that. But I suppose what I found really fascinating, because I was a directorate manager at the time, and then later, as she moves on with her 3-point plan, I become a divisional director. What really fascinated me was, for the first time in my career, I had seen an HR professional lead the organisational change. So this wasn't an accountant fronting it, this wasn't the chief executive fronting it, but this was a chief people officer saying people are our main resource, they're our main cost, but they're also our main asset. And if we're going to make any improvements here, we've really got to back our people and invest in them. So, what do I say? Should we start with step one? So fixing the money. Now, this probably is not news to you. You've seen it all before. I'd certainly seen it several times before in my previous organisation in different iterations. But the first thing that Jacqueline did as Chief People Officer is she brought in external scrutiny from PwC. Now, that might have been mandated by NHS Improvement when we went into special measures, but they made their presence known. This was no audit exercise. This wasn't something behind the scenes. Meeting room in Trust headquarters was taken over. It was a glass-walled room, and it was renamed very briefly the War Room. It was very quickly given a new name because I think they thought the War Room was possibly a bit confrontational, but I'm afraid they were too late to change it, and the name stuck, and we all just continued to call it the War Room out of naughtiness, I think, just to annoy the execs. And so this War Room was set up, and I think on a daily basis the exec team met and they had a huddle, and they discussed the plan for fixing the money and getting the organisation into turnaround. And all around the walls of this glass room were flip chart papers covered in scribbles with all of their thoughts. Now that's interesting only because as a directorate, the 7 directorates in the organisation, the management team or leadership team of each of the directorates was called into the War Room on a weekly basis. I think my day was a Wednesday. You had to turn up on a Wednesday and you were grilled, quizzed, challenged, dragged across the coals, what your financial position is, what your plan is to turn it around, how you're going to close the deficit, what you're going to do to contribute towards closing the gap at a trust-wide level. We were given really explicit targets, and this is the first time, I think, when we talk about saving money in the NHS, particularly when we used to talk about Sept or CRES or whatever the kind of buzzword for financial improvement, it's always left quite open to you as a budget holder to figure out how you're going to make the savings. And I think in the NHS, I've seen a lot of artistic license applied to how we save money. And there's a lot of kind of creative accounting or actually quite perverse behaviours. So in a PBR system, particularly when I managed neurosciences or orthopedics, we had really big high income generating specialties, and we could just, pump patient activity through the system and try and bring in lots of income, but of course bankrupt the healthcare economy in so doing. So during this financial turnaround, we were given very explicit targets. I think it was a 5% headcount reduction, and week in, week out, we had to explain almost by name who we were removing, what posts we were removing from the structure to deliver the financial savings. There are a lot of checks and balances introduced, and I'm sure your organisations have been through all of this as well, but caps and limits on discretionary spend, agency spend, the levels of authorisation were taken to exec level. Even when I was an on-call manager, I was calling the execs to say, will you sign off an agency shift at 3 o'clock in the morning for A&E? Everything had to be signed for, and then the next day accounted for why you did that. But at the same time, whilst this was definitely quite a ferocious and it felt a very stressful time, the War Room, the glass walls, the drumbeat of weekly meetings, it also was introducing an assurance framework. We were being told we could earn our autonomy if we demonstrated that we could turn our directorate finances around. The grip would be loosened on some of the checks and balances or the discretionary spend. We could manage our budgets if we demonstrated that we had the grip and control of our own processes. So personally, I learned a lot, probably the steepest learning curve I've ever been through in my career. And I think I've learned a lot from it that I still take to this day. But the Chief People Officer was front and centre of this. She was in the room. She was chairing the meetings. PwC were in step with her. They worked for her. It was very clear that she was managing the message, and she was managing the execs at the same time. So she was holding them to account. I think for me, what I learned there is that it's off. Actually, I think I agree that HR are better at probably running financial turnaround than finance, because finance won't hold themselves to account or look themselves in the mirror. And so I felt that what she demonstrated was that we could act as neutral vendors in HR in holding people to account, but also focusing on the people and the structure and roles and responsibilities. So that was step one. Step two sounds nice, but at the time I don't think it felt quite so supported. But she ensured that as part of this financial turnaround, there was a real investment in leadership. So quite quickly after financial turnaround and the financial special measures took place, so that was within a year, we met the control total and were officially taken out of financial special measures. But quite quickly after that, the next stage of the plan was unveiled to us all. So we moved from 7 directorates to 5 divisions, and these were called clinical divisions, and clinical leadership was front and centre. So kind of overnight, my boss changed from being the chief operating officer to my clinical director, and my clinical director, his reporting line changed from being the medical director to the chief operating officer. So clinicians were in charge, that was the message, but they were also going to be held accountable. We invested in it. So the clinical directors were given 4 PAs 2 days a week to lead and run their clinical divisions. And there was this introduction of a concept called service line management. So the idea was that decisions about services should be made closest to the front line. But that meant giving people the tools to do so and the skills to do it. So we needed financial reporting, a service line, but we also needed people to be upskilled. And so as leadership teams, so HR business partners, finance business partners, clinical directors, heads of nursing, divisional managers, all went through an SLM leadership development program together. And it was really thorough. So again, despite being in financial special measures, despite finances being tight, this was an investment. So NHS Elect were commissioned and led a leadership development programme, and it supported the execs and the senior leaders within the divisions to understand themselves as leaders, to understand our gaps, how we worked as teams, and we really together formed an operating model, an assurance framework that we were all comfortable with and that we all understood. And during this time, I think my division actually went into internal special measures, which meant, having had the war room step down, it then got stepped back up, or we were given additional support or advice. And so step 2 really was, I think, acknowledging that you can't just give people the hairdryer treatment when you want them to deliver. You also have to invest in them, make sure that they feel valued and that you're really investing in their career and talents. Okay, so step 3. Step 3 was about improving patient care. And I only say it's step 3, not because it's in any way the third in line of importance. It's absolutely the number one thing that we're here to do in a hospital. But it came third because I think as a chief people officer, she wanted to get our house in order before turning to the real challenge, which wasn't, the thing that was making the headlines, which was our finances, but really it was our patient care. So clinical quality as the kind of organising principle of the NHS, we had really poor for our performance as an organisation. We had very high hospital occupancy levels, bed occupancy over 100% all the time, kind of chaos, people being boarded in beds overnight in corridors or in recovery rooms or in day case units, and all the kind of usual things, and winter pressure being a really difficult winter pressure at North Bristol used to just go on all year. We didn't understand anything other than being in winter pressure. So patient care is what was next. And how she did it was through organisational development. So something called the Perform Academy was created. And I'm sure you've seen this in your own organisations, but essentially a continuous improvement methodology was introduced to the whole organisation, which was based loosely on lean methodology. But our focus for it was patient flow and valuing patients' time. And so PwC were contracted and we went to tender. I remember being on the panel choosing the provider for this contract. And we worked with PwC and they brought in 15 of their own members of staff, and we seconded 15 members of NBT staff to work alongside them. So 50-50. And these 30 people became known as perform coaches. And they were dedicated to every single ward in the hospital. So every ward in our hospital and clinical department had dedicated perform coach support every single day of the week. And these perform coaches ran huddles in the morning, at shift changes and at the end of the day, which checked in with the team, understood the work to be done in that department that day, understood the priorities going forward in the longer term for that department, and what the barriers and blockers were to getting things done and valuing patients' time and improving patient flow. It used a coaching and empowerment model, so everyone very quickly learned that I think how to use coaching conversations and how to use that approach to speak to each other and try to problem solve, not through top-down rollout of solutions, but empowering clinical teams on the front line to design their own solutions to problems. And the whole point, obviously, with Lean was to reduce waste, delays, and improved outcomes, which contributed to significant savings in the end. I think when we first, I remember again, through that kind of drumbeat of the war room, which stayed around for a long time, we as clinical divisions were asked to identify people to second into the Perform Academy. And at first, I think, everyone does probably the same thing, which is comes up with a list of people that, you'd quite like to leave your department, maybe people who aren't performing or who are problematic. And the chief people officer tore up the list and said, I'm not having it. This is a huge investment. We want your top people. We want your best people, because that's the only way that this culture change is going to be credible across the organisation, and it's the only way that's going to work. So really high profile members of staff, consultant surgeons, heads of nursing, HR business partners, the works, a whole range of people joined the Perform Academy and were really pivotal in, I think, getting that traction across the organisation in how to get this culture change moving and improve patient care. 15% of the workforce attended what we call boot camps, which were all-day training sessions, which introduced a 10-step improvement methodology, which would be used then on the wards in huddles. And the idea was that people would then be free to use those skills in their clinical teams or non-clinical departments to apply it to problems. So, for example, even in my neurology admin offices, they would have their own huddle, daily huddle in the morning with a status board, and they would be using the Lean skills that they'd learned to apply it to improving turnaround time for letter typing or results to patients, anything you could think of, any process we had in the organisation. The idea was that the Perform methodology could be used and applied to it. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to try and do something really clever, but I'm going to show you a little video. So fingers crossed. Yes.
Rona, can I just get you to hit pause? I've got your presentation. I can hear it. I've got your presentation window floating in front of it.
Hello, my name is Rebecca Winterbourne and I am a consultant vascular surgeon here at NBT. I've always been interested in the power of change, but never had the opportunity to implement it within the NHS. So when I first received the email about the boot camps, I thought, wow, this is for me. To be given the opportunity to have the time to learn the skills necessary to make change, and then to be able to share those with others in the organisation is something that is really important to me. It means spending time on the ward, having the opportunity to empower all members of the team to make small changes which could make really big changes to individual patient journeys. So I think one of the big highlights, or one of the big things that's important to me, has been the ability to have conversations with people from all walks of life within the trust, and it doesn't matter whether you work in communications or on the ward or in a clinical team, you have the power to make changes. I think my key message is that change can be really difficult, but it's really important. And whilst it can feel uncomfortable getting involved, I urge you all to take the time and learn as much as you can from the Perform coaches, see what it's all about, and invest in your future and the future of patients that come to MBT.
Hello, right, can you hear me now? Excellent. I'm going to try and find my slides now. Oh, move on. There you go. Can you see my next slide, Lorna?
I can, but I need your presentation view to switch. So just your display settings, I've got your presenter view at the moment. It's flipped over for some reason.
Okay.
Just thinking about it.
Doesn't want to do it, does it?
Don't worry, we can see them.
You can see them, don't worry. Okay, so that was the three things, the not rocket science, the fixing the money, investing in the leadership, and prioritising and improving patient care. But I think it would be unfair to say that there weren't other things that happened at the same time. So the trust strategy was simplified. We started with eight priorities as a trust, and when it was refreshed, it was stripped back to 4. Staff wellbeing was prioritised, and I think Perform and the investment in secondments and the huddles and that culture of celebrating success on a daily basis really supported that and helped that to kind of snowball. And so ultimately North Bristol ended up having one of the, I think, the most impressive staff wellbeing offerings in the country, and won lots of awards for it. At this stage, staff psychology services was invested in, winter nurses to support staff health during winter pressures was introduced, EAP, all these kind of things that we all kind of take for granted now. Back then was quite trailblazing and showed that really that, I think that the chief people officer element of the leadership of the change was really fundamental, and that's what helped make it really people focused. So ultimately, I felt like this talk, before I wrap up, I should really talk about was there a plan? Now, I didn't ask Jacqueline at the time what her plan was and how she structured her thoughts. But now, knowing what I know about cultural change, I've made an attempt to guess what she was up to. So I've had a look at the McKinsey's 7S model, and I think when you look at this model, you start to see what she did and what she was thinking in delivering this shared value and what ultimately became known as 1MBT. As what people would use in kind of common vernacular. So in terms of the structure, she took our 7 directorates to 5 divisions, and that was a painful restructure. People lost their roles. High-profile people were redeployed into more junior positions. Clinical directors lost their position, which at the time felt like something that would never have been done, but it was about professionalising the role of clinical directors. The strategy, I said, I just touched on it briefly, but was stripped right back from 8 to 4. And it was one PDF piece of A4 paper that everyone had on their desk, and you could link your own personal objectives and your team's objectives to the trust strategy and how you contribute. Skills. So I think as an HR professional, the exec who led this whole change was really understood the importance of talent development and skills training. So huge investment in staff. So 15% of our workforce went through the Perform methodology boot camps. We continued after PwC left to maintain a Perform academy and invest in staff secondments and roles within that team. And then the senior leadership team went through the NHS Elect leadership training and continued to be an annual cycle of leadership development. Style, so coaching. So I think when I first started this talk, I spoke about the war room, and it was really adversarial, this glass boxed room. the flip charts around the paper, if you were around the walls, if you were caught reading the flip charts, you would get told off. I mean, it was this, I mean, some of it was real intentional psychology, I suppose, to create this sense of friction and the urgency around the financial turnaround. But as the years wore on, the style changed and coaching started to become part of the way that we worked as an organisation. And that contributed, I think, to this focus on pride at work. So this whole time period that I speak of, sort of 2015 to 2019, is when Twitter was in its heyday, and the whole of the NHS was all over Twitter. So we were hashtagging #1MBT, #MBT proud, and everyone could join in. So it didn't matter if you were part of the exec or the senior leadership team, everyone was contributing to a sense of pride. Staff wellbeing, I talked about that being prioritised, really developed our offering. And I think that, you know, obviously what we have now would not be there if it wasn't for the work that was done during this turnaround and this cultural change. And systems, when you operating framework, there were consequences. Divisions were put into turnaround. People would be moved on if their division was unable to demonstrate financial grip and managerial control. But also there were levels, and you understood where you were. You were ranked. You were the execs would tell you their assessment and their confidence levels in you as a leadership team. And so I suppose, what did it all achieve? And I haven't mentioned that. I've left that for the big conclusion. So what happened is, very quickly, we came out of financial special measures. So the war room, painful though it was, might have been worth it. Very quickly in 2017, NHS Improvement announced that North Bristol would be taken out of its financial special measures. By 2019, we reported a financial surplus, which was brilliant. In 2019, the staff survey results showed that 69% of staff and respondents would recommend MBT as a place to work. At the start of this talk, it was at 59, so a 10% increase in recommending the place to work in only 4 years. Length of stay reduced by 13%, 50 empty beds, that contributed to the financial savings. But there was an improvement in 4-hour performance, there was an increase in elective activity, but there was also a continued creeping up and up of demand on services. So at no point did demand drop. So it was about kind of rebuilding the aircraft in flight, as we always like to talk about in the NHS. At no point was the pressure ever released. And then ultimately, I suppose the cherry on the cake, or the rosette on the Jack Russell, was that the CQC's unannounced visit in 2019 resulted in a good overall rating for the trust, but outstanding for caring and leadership. And I think that just shows that it works, and the women knew what she was doing. So Jacqueline really led from the front, and I think for me, taught me the real power of HR and OD in turning around culture and improving performance of an organisation. So sorry, my screen isn't working properly, but thank you for letting me share my story. I was just going to do a very quick disclaimer that this is my story. This is how I saw it. This is how I experienced it. Other people were there at the same time. Liz Perry was there. Caroline, who just commented, she was there. And everyone will have seen it from their own perspective, but this is just my own story. But happy to take questions and discussions. I hope you can tell that I love talking about it. So over to you.
I have a couple of questions from the chat. One is probably poignant at the moment. You used the term war room, and that language feels quite misaligned with compassionate cultures. Have you reflected on that choice, and would you do it differently if you did a similar programme now?
Absolutely. I mean, what a terrible name. Can you think of anything? I mean, what on earth were they thinking? I suspect what happened was the exec team in a room with the door closed thought it was a brilliant idea, and then didn't think about how that would land with the organisation, and it was terrible. I mean, obviously in 2015 it was a different time, but even then I think they understood that it didn't work, and immediately it got changed to something like the cabinet room, or something like really generic. But so I think there's a big lesson in this, that you have to think about you have to be trauma informed, you have to be compassionate as a leader, and think about the optics on everything that you do. Because I intentionally used the word war room the entire time I worked there, because they'd done it, and I felt like, no, you can't undo it, you've done it. And so it became something that we used to kind of poke and niggle at the leaders in the organisation. So yeah, terrible decision.
We've got just under 10 minutes left, and I'm conscious we'll pass back to Joel to wrap up. Have you noticed anything that I'm presuming we means NHS, could be doing that other public sectors are doing well? I guess cross industry learning is the needle there.
To me, is this?
Mm-hmm.
So I have now left the NHS and I've been with the police for a year. So I'm no expert in policing, and recognise that it's not a huge time to have been apart. But my reflection, and really similar to that question that was posed about the war room, is that having worked for the NHS for such a long time, and we talk about being caring, and however, I think that actually we take it for granted and we don't, maybe things are changing now and I hope that they are, but what I've been really surprised by and impressed by with the police is that they really are very caring, and trauma informed would be how I use it. So one of our strategic imperatives in the police is to be trauma informed. Now, obviously that's trauma informed in terms of working with victims, but from an HR and OD perspective, it's always with a view to how we deal with our workforce as well, who are exposed to trauma on a daily basis. And I find that a big reflection for me. I don't think in the NHS we talked about that. We didn't really talk about the trauma we exposed our staff to. We didn't talk about the impact of our leadership or management behaviours on staff well-being, particularly. I think the NHS has historically quite a brutal leadership culture. I mean, in the time that I worked at MET or at UHBW, the turnover of whether that be chief executives or executive directors was high, and people were seen as quite disposable. And having moved sector quite recently, I'd say we can do much better in the NHS. We could be a lot more compassionate in how we think about each other and work with each other.
Amazing. And the last question before I hand back to Joel. Were values and principles and ways of working refreshed as a result of the work? And did you manage to hold on to the good stuff? How do you weave that in to new culture?
Well, I think this is really interesting because I don't... Jacqueline Ferguson, who was the chief people officer that I worked for and who led a lot of these changes, she was an interim. And at the end, just before COVID hit, she left and a substantive chief people officer was appointed. And then shortly after COVID, a new chief executive started. And so I think, and this will not be news to anyone, that these changes and these improvements don't stick if executives leave without handing over and explaining and inducting new execs into what they've done and why. And so very quickly things start to unravel. Now, COVID obviously happened really quickly into 2019 and 2020. And so, the rules of engagement changed dramatically. But with the new chief executive, North Bristol has essentially gone back to the beginning and done it all over again and introduced a new leadership development programme and a new continuous improvement programme called Patient First. And it's all the same principles, but starting again because I think that we didn't with Perform and with this turnaround programme think about longevity and sustainability, and particularly around execs. It became extremely linked to personalities, and when those people left, it didn't sustain.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. I think I'm going to bring in Joel.
Well, thank you, Lorna. I remember being sat outside the war room, Rona. We were supplying staff in 2019 and being summoned to the war room. So, yeah, it was an interesting time. I remember getting the email going, "We'd like to meet you at 2:00 in the war room, please." I remember sitting there going, have I got an email from someone to talk about something that's gone to the wrong person? So interesting use of language that struck me when I was sat outside. It didn't feel like a war room when I remember soon coming out, albeit lots of important discussions happening internally. I've got a very simple close, which is to thank both of you for your presentations, your time, your insight, particularly both of you, the personal insight and experience. I think that is so powerful when people bring those stories to bring to life any change program that they've gone through. Lots of learning and development points and a raft of excellent questions from today that's just brought some of that personal aspects from the people watching and listening as well. For anyone who missed the session, I'm sure any colleagues on the call will make sure that they understand how worthwhile tuning in for 90 minutes will be when it comes to learning and development, but also some of the stories that you've been talking about both. So thank you both from the bottom of my heart, because I asked you very kindly to come and do this, and it wasn't even a consideration as to yes or no. It was a definite yes. So thank you very much. I think that closes out session 2 of the change program. We will have a committee meeting no doubt soon when we'll sit down and think about the rest, but please, any thoughts and ideas from a committee point of view that we think in terms of discussions or sessions you've been interested in, please reach out to Liz, Lorna or myself. Always interested to hear. So thank you all. Lorna, back to you, but session closed.
Thank you, everyone. I release you with 4 minutes to spare. That's brew time. Though you will get a feedback link very, very shortly. If you can let me have your feedback, good, bad, and otherwise. And I will get the recordings and slide decks over to you as soon as I can. Thank you so much, everyone, for your energy and attention today. And we will see you at an HPMA event very soon.
Thanks all.